Secretary General, thank you for welcoming us in your NATO headquarters in Brussels. Anniversary of attacks on the United States, when nearly 3,000 people died. But since then, even bigger number of coalition troops were killed in Afghanistan trying to prevent similar attacks in the future. And now Afghani soldiers killing Americans who are training them. And of course the toll on Afghani people is immense. Was this blood worth it?
Every one single killing and soldier fallen is one too much, obviously. Having said that, we should also recall what was the purpose of the establishment of an international military operation in Afghanistan. The purpose was, and it remains, to prevent the country from once again becoming a safe haven for terrorists who could use it as a launching pad for attacks against our societies. And in that respect, our operation has been a great success. We have not seen terrorists launch attacks against our countries rooted in Afghanistan since we started our operation in Afghanistan.
But hasn't NATO repeated Soviet Union's mistakes by underestimating the resistance of local people? And isn't NATO heading for similar undignified retreat?
No, on the contrary. We have actually learned the lessons. And one clear difference is that we have built up a very strong Afghan security force, which will take over.
But there is a lot of mistrust. Bagram prison was handed over to Afghani authorities, but Americans will still control part of it and some of the inmates.
The transfer of detainees to Afghan responsibility is part of the overall transition of security responsibility to the Afghans. But obviously, we also have to strike the right balance between Afghan sovereignty and security for the Afghan security forces and our troops.
After 2014, will the NATO troops come back to their barracks to defend their countries, or do you have still unfinished business elsewhere?
It's for each individual coalition partner to decide whether they will engage in other international missions, for instance, United Nations mandated missions elsewhere.
But you're not considering Syria or?
No, we have no intention to intervene militarily in Syria, and we have no plans to intervene militarily elsewhere.
President Putin has suggested that if Barack Obama is re-elected, there could be a compromise over NATO's missile defense system in Europe. If Mitt Romney is elected, he could turn this system against Russia. Do you think the future of the system depends on who wins American election?
Not at all. We have made clear to the Russians that the NATO missile defense system is not designed to attack Russia or undermine Russia's strategic deterrence. And obviously we have no intention whatsoever to attack Russia. Actually, Russia and NATO signed a joint document in 1997 called the Founding Act. In that document, Russia and NATO clearly state that we will not use force against each other. We stick to that commitment. I hope, and I would also expect, that Russia also sticks to that commitment.
But Russia expects some harder guarantees, some binding guarantees. Why don't you give it to them?
Because the best guarantee Russia could get whatsoever would be to engage constructively in a cooperation on missile defense. We have even suggested to establish some joint centers so that they could see with their own eyes that our system is not directed against Russia.
You have just urged Russia to be more transparent over its military exercises later this month. What is your concern And are you worried that this exercise will take place near Georgia, almost coinciding with elections there?
We're not opposed to exercises, but we request transparency as a confidence building measure. What is the purpose of the exercise? Where does it take place? How is this exercise conducted?
What information is missing? Why is it not full?
Yeah, but we have not received any formal information from Russia, which we strongly regret.
But you seem to be keen to see Georgia joining NATO. Obviously, it's going to anger Russians even more. And how far is NATO ready to move into what Moscow consider its spheres of interest?
We stick to a very fundamental principle to which all nations in the Euro-Atlantic area signed up in 1999 in an OSCE charter. And that fundamental principle is that each individual nation has a right to decide its alliance affiliation herself. I hope Russia also sticks to that. So it's for Georgia to decide, and Georgia has declared that it is a Georgian aspiration. And in 2008, NATO decided at a summit in Bucharest that Georgia will become a member of NATO, of course provided that Georgia fulfills the necessary criteria.
And the last question on Armenia, you've just visited it, maybe you saw anti-NATO protests. Don't you feel any responsibility for what happened with this Armenian soldier killed at the NATO course in Budapest?
This is a very unfortunate case, but let me stress that I was not faced with anti-NATO demonstrations. I was faced with young protesters who demonstrated against the Azerbaijani decision to pardon the military officer Safarov. That terrible crime shouldn't be glorified. And I am deeply concerned that the Azerbaijani decision to pardon this army officer damages trust, and it does certainly not contribute to peace, to cooperation and reconciliation in the region.
Mr. Rasmussen, thank you very much for the interview for Euronews.
You're welcome.